Nice. The classic Simmons sounds.
The sound of the early Simmons kits, you know, for certainly the sort of 5-6 years, can sort of be summed up in one word, and that word is. That's about it. The bass drum sounded like that, the snare drum sounded like that, and the toms was the same but a longer version of that. And yeah, it is the EastEnders sound, the beginning of EastEnders or the end of EastEnders sound. That is the Simmons sound.
The Simmons drum kit's hilarious. I mean, every drummer had one, and every track you heard on a record, apart from you did do do do, you know, which was a bit of a sadness, because the actual Simmons kit could do so much more than that. But it was just something that everybody sort of latched onto and went, oh, that's what it would do, you know.
The Simmons drum kit was invented by a man called, wait for it, Dave Simmons.
He was the fantastic British inventor, you know, much like Dyson or someone today. He had this vision of electronic drums and really, you know, really took it on. There was a lot of opposition to it, and he was pretty much out on his own.
I'm Dave Simmons. What I used to do was electronic drums.
A complete nutcase. I got on really well with him. Yeah, I mean, I was never a drummer, but I have a fascination for people like that. I have a fascination for people who can visualise something that they don't really know what it is they're trying to produce.
And it really took off because we went to a trade show, and I'd made 3 drum kits. One was a hexagonal shaped drum kit, one was a heart shaped drum kit, and one was a bat shaped drum kit. The idea that they would appeal to various drummers, because at that time we were saying we could make drum kits any shape you like. We made one for Richard Burgess. What he did Einstein a Go-Go made out of heads, which were glass fibre heads, and he smacked those on top of the pops. So we went along to a trade show showing these weird shaped drum kits, and everybody pretty much liked the hexagonal shaped drum kit.
As well as producing drums that looked like skulls, Dave was keen to make his trade show appearances as crazy as possible.
I think we had a Midas room once where we had a soundproof booth that was done out like an Inca temple. We didn't sacrifice anybody, maybe we should have done.
You had these sort of strange hexagonal almost pads instead of the sort of, you know, your sort of deep snare and your bass drum and all this sort of stuff. And I think it was just an attempt to almost kind of combine what was good about synthesizers and the electronic side of music, giving that to something that drummers couldn't have up to that point. You know, drummers, I don't know whether Dave Simmons himself kind of felt a bit left out by the likes of, you know, maybe the keyboard player that he had in his band, but they created this sort of monster.
I was introduced to Dave Simmons by Richard Burgess, who produced the first couple of Spandau Ballet albums. Well, produced the first one and didn't produce the second one by the sound of it. He's a great mate of David's, so I went up to his place in St Albans, and I think I had the 3rd SDS5 ever made. I think the first one he kept, you know, for himself. The second one went to Mike Oldfield, and I had the 3rd one. As I say, that was made out of solid wood then, and used it on Top of the Pops and all that sort of stuff. Chant Number 1 was the only actual record we recorded with it. It took a lot of getting used to. I mean, because with real drums it's all about input and output, and you know, the harder you hit it, the harder you kick down. Whereas, you know, getting the sensitivity right is difficult, because you're used to that sort of relationship between this and that. With electronic drums and Simmons, you had to relearn all that. Otherwise, I mean, if you really played through them, I mean, these were a later development. I mean, the originals that were actually solid wood with riot shield on, you could really just damage your wrists and your tendons and all sorts of things. As I say, the biggest problem I found was the kick drum, just smashing things to bits, because after years of playing small places and no amplification, you were well used to bashing it, and with these you just used to break them.
At that time, we didn't think that we had to have a head on the drum. We did in the end, we gave in the end, but to start with, one of the fast response, it helped the electronics work really quick, and it gave the drummer something really fast to play off. The downside was the drummers would still smack hell out of this stuff, and because it was right shield material, the thing that gave was their wrists in the end. If they couldn't just lighten up a little bit, a lot of them can't, smack hell out of this thing and go, ouch!
You just look at them and you think, yeah, Phil Collins, Roger Taylor, and Duran Duran, Shalimar, maybe. Yeah. It's just top of the pops moment where everyone's got these terrible hexagonal things making crap noises.
It was the way that you could say to the world that you were modern. It doesn't matter whether you're like a kind of incredibly like dyed-in-the-wall regular band. If you had the Simmons kit there, it showed that you were a little bit forward-looking. The thing with the Simmons was it was the trigger. So you would hit the pad, and it would then feed through, and it would play a sample, and the samples were adjustable and all the rest of it. Now, there were pros and cons to this. I think New Order used to have on the side of the stage, and when Peter Hook didn't have anything to do, he'd go over and he'd hit it.
I saw the Thompson twins, Spandau Ballet, and Aswad, actually, on Top of the Pops, all using the Simmons kit.
Spandau Ballet obviously picked up on it because they could have a pure, white, very clean-looking drum kit on stage, and that fitted in with what they wanted things to look like. The reggae guys picked up on it. We had a red and orange sunburst kit like a Tequila Sunrise. They liked that look.
But more recently, I've seen people like Bjork had this fantastic drummer that was on tour with her, and he still used a Simmons kit. I mean, they're such a sort of funny-looking thing to have on stage. They're really bizarre, especially when you got these sort of multicoloured symbols that they did with them as well. I mean, it just looked like a collection of UFOs that you were sort of hitting around you. They're absolutely fantastic in their sort of style. And I think it's that sort of memory of seeing these bands on Top of the Pops using it, and me just transfixed. But I didn't care who was singing. I didn't care who the bass player was. All I cared about was looking at this drum kit and going, what the hell is that thing?
The cameramen on Top of the Pops were zooming in, oh, something new. And also the guys that were buying them going, something new, there's something new here.
A real drum kit, you know, whether it's a real drum kit or a real piano or a real vintage synth, is infinitely variable. You know, there's no way you can kind of faithfully reproduce the sound of it, especially with early 80s electronics. And so I think what people had to do was embrace the sound of the Simmons for what it was, and kind of look at it as you know, as this sort of unique sci-fi kind of sound.
Like any groundbreaking invention, the Simmons drum was prone to, well, teething problems.
Relying totally on electronics at the time was, was difficult. I remember a gig we played in Portugal where the power is notoriously not great. It was pretty much pitch to voltage stuff, so we were only getting 90 volts, and the kit was just going and farting really, which was ugly. Another start of a tour, I had a fan on the same plug board as the Simmons, which was just sending spikes, and for the first number it played itself. It was just going off, and I was just sort of sitting there as a spectator really.
One of the major innovations of the Simmons drum was its ability to sample.
I think the spiritual ancestor of the Simmons drums were those like feels like I'm in love, boo boo. You know, those little accessories from the old disco records. Because they're really, really good at just adding stupid little percussion bits. You know, a bit of a breaking bottle, a barking dog, boo boo, anything like that. They're fine for. But when it's a proper drummer,
what you end up with is Roger Taylor going, wild boys, wild
absolutely,
boys,
yeah,
wild boys. It's awful.
And nobody needs that.
The Simmons company folded, but Dave has continued to invent new technology.
About 3 years ago, I couldn't earn any more money out of making electronic drums. A friend of mine had a beauty salon, and he was doing false nails, and he couldn't train his girls to do false nails because they're using live models. So he asked me, we've been fishing buddies for years, to come up with an invention where he could train his girls. So we invented this, tooled it up, patented it, and now we're selling it to 20 countries around the world. It's a very realistic hand, it's got fleshy fingertips, plug-in nail shapes, and it allows people to learn how to do nail extensions without hurting anybody.
Spandau Ballet are still touring as Hadley, Keeble and Norman, and they've still got their beloved Simmons drum kit.
If I'd been in a band in the 80s and I was a drummer, I would have wanted a Simmons. It was a real fashion statement, you know. It was he's got a Simmons, you know, and there's this sort of possibility of standing up behind the kit and sort of having your sort of pads mounted around you so you could sort of strike them very kind of heroically.
Loved it. Loved it. In fact, I think we used a couple of sounds on the new album and that.
What do you like about it?
It's just so plastic. So pretend drums.